Good afternoon. My name is Umi Ahmed Mikidash, and you are listening to Your Voice, the voice of experts. Today, my guest is from Brazil. His name is Shigueo Watanabe. Shigueo Watanabe is an expert on the carbon market. With 20 years of experience in the field of climate policies, he is now head of two organizations which inform how to understand climate, and the other is to analyze the development policies of the Brazil government. In the podcast Your Voice on Radio Environment, he describes the statement made by President Lula da Silva in Dubai at the 28th UN climate talks, and he also explains the climate policies in Brazil and the divisions of the government. To use his words, on the one hand, there is a frank and positive policies in favor of climate action and reforestation of the Amazon forest, with the Minister of the Environment originally from this part of Brazil. But there is a part of the government, including the Minister of Energy, that supports fossil fuels, with the private sector, the agribusiness, as main support. Brazil is expected to join the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries, OPEC, next year, and it will host COP30 in 2025. Shigueo Watanabe tells on Radio Environment the Brazilian president's journey, analyzes his climate policies, and explains the historical context of the carbon market in Brazil, its obstacles, and the reason for the reluctance of communities. I am Umi Ahmed Mikidash, and you are listening to Your Voice with Shigueo Watanabe.
This is Radio Environment, the radio of environmental education. You are listening to the podcast
Your Voice with Shigueo Watanabe.
Por favor, vamos olhar para as nossas crianças, vamos olhar para a educação delas.
Good afternoon. My name is Umi Ahmed Mikidash, and you are listening to Your Voice, the voice of experts. Today, my guest is from Brazil, and he will give his view related to the venue of President Lula from Brazil in Dubai during COP28 and his statement. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Could you please introduce yourself?
My name is Shigueo Watanabe. I'm a Brazilian, and I've been working in the climate space for the last 25 years. At this moment, I work basically with two organizations here in Brazil, one that is dedicated to climate communications, how to convey the right messages to the public, and another that is a think tank that is specialized in arguing about the policies that the government is developing. So these are my two major activities right now. Now, both of them are NGOs. One of them is called Climatique, and the other one is called Talanoa. And I'm based in São Paulo, but I have to admit that I know quite a lot of my country. I travel a lot all around the place.
Related to COP28 and the statement of the President Luis Inácio Lula da Silva. Did you listen to this statement, and what do you think of this?
Yes, I did. And what basically we think is that the government is kind of split in two. You have on one side Marina Silva, our environment minister, that's pushing very strongly. Her whole life was dedicated to the environmental cause, and she's pushing the climate agenda very, very strongly. On the other hand, you have the traditional industries here in Brazil, and our energy minister, Silveira, is now appearing in every place as admitting that Brazil may join the OPEC in the beginning of next year. It's a big contradiction, and I think at the end of the day, most likely Lula will tend to entering OPEC anyhow. And it's a contradiction that we will all explore. We will all try to make these guys pay a heavy price in terms of image, in terms of reputation for doing such a bad thing like that. If you think COP30 is going to be here in Brazil, it's going to give an awful message if Brazil increases its oil explorations and at the same time tries to paint itself as green in the Amazon forest and so on.
So the government is divided, but last year when he came and he was a president-elect, there was a huge crowd to actually say that he was the one at COP27. He even said that he will have an indigenous minister. And you said that this year at COP28, you show that what actually you show in your country, this division between the two sides of his government. How can you see his climate policy, for instance? How can you understand, even if there is a division between the government, as you said, how do you understand his policies?
So on one side, since deforestation is our big source of emissions, and the work that Marina Silva and the environmental agencies are doing this year is absolutely fantastic. Deforestation rate fell to 50% during this year, basically by command and control. And now we enter a second phase where they're going to start putting money to develop the places so that people will have a better condition of life without having to cut down trees and things like that. So it's a very, very strong agenda. It's being pushed very, very seriously. And I think that Lula will be able to show in COP30 that deforestation now is at the lowest point in the last forever. But at the same time, Brazil is, well, it's not the poorest country in the world, but it's certainly not a rich country. And we do have a certain amount of oil reserves. And then you have a group of people in the government that still believes that developing industry, that burning fossil fuels is the way to make the country rich. We don't believe in that, of course, but there is a strong group, and they are very strong inside the government. So what you see is basically a government divided on these two agendas, and both sides will keep pushing their agendas forward.
So the private sector, what is the role of the private sector in the government, for instance?
Our private sector is basically, we used to have a strong industry, and it is basically outdated right now. We have a very, very strong agribusiness caucus in the government, in the Congress. They are the major exporters right now, so they're the major people that bring dollars inside the country. But they are very, very backwards in terms of policy. They don't believe in climate change, or if they do, they don't want to change anything in the country because of that. And we have a huge service sector, like lots of other middle-income countries, that is completely disorganized. So they don't have too much voice, they don't have representation in the Congress. So who really is playing the game strongly is basically our agribusiness people. And they were basically the people that elected Bolsonaro in the last 4 years, and they are mostly from the right. And they really have a very, very old view of what development means and what a rich country should do in terms of its people.
As you said, all these elements related to the context in your country, related to the view of the far right, which is within the government, if I do understand what you're saying, how the civil society push the information on climate action with this in mind.
We basically are trying to do is, well, there are several movements in different directions. First place, it has to be grassroots. We have to get in touch with the people again, and we kind of lost a bit of that contact during lots of time, and now we're starting to go back to the field, contact people, make them echo their voices, and so on. This was basically almost impossible during the Bolsonaro government, and now we're doing it again. We do have an Indian ministry for the first time in our history. We have an indigenous lady that is our Minister of Indigenous People here in Brazil, and she's doing a fantastic job. And that became headline along the whole year. And of course, a lot of our organizations are pushing her to keep her voice loud. And again, the agribusiness people don't like her at all.
I see. You said the agribusiness have a strong power in the government, but also you have a strong minister of indigenous. And you said at the beginning of the conversation that there are displaced people. How the carbon market is understood, and how the carbon market actually is integrated in Brazil related to the new government of Lula.
Well, there is a bill right now going through Congress There were hopes that Lula would be able to announce that the bill was approved, but I don't think that we'll have time for that. It's something that started in 2009, that we started digging into how to create a carbon market, an ETS kind of market, a cap and trade market here in Brazil. There were several movements during this last 13 years. In the last 2 years, it picked up a bit of speed. Right now, well, the bill that the government presented in July was quite good. But when you go through Congress in Brazil, I imagine in other countries as well, people start changing things in the middle. And right now, the last version that we have is rather complicated. Basically, because what we do need is a cap and trade market, kind of the European one or the one in China and in lots of other places, where you put caps on the industry and then you let them trade the permissions at the end of the year. Because Brazil had a strong participation in the Kyoto Protocol, and we developed lots of carbon projects at that time, there is a kind of a culture inside that carbon market is about developing projects that get carbon credits. And there's not this culture of cap and trade. And then the agribusiness people, again, started thinking that they would have a large opportunity of earning lots of money in this carbon market if they could sell carbon credits inside a cap and trade system. So what we're seeing now in a bill is a kind of a monster that has some aspects of a decent cap and trade thing, and then some aspects that will absolutely destroy the functioning of the market. Let me just explain a little bit what I mean with that. When you have a cap and trade system, what you want to do is a carbon price that goes stepwise upward, up to the point where each industry says, well, now is the time for me to change my equipment. Now is the time to change my process. So that's the basic idea behind the cap and trade system. So you will push the price upwards along the time, slowly, of course, and that allows the industry to plan exactly the moment that they will transition to a low carbon process. When you open the door to carbon credits or whatever kind of carbon credits, you lose control of the price of the carbon, because that is dictated by another market that has other rules, other demands, and what will probably happen is that the price of these carbon credits are going to be lower than the price of the permissions. That means if I'm an industry, instead of changing my process, instead of abandoning the fossil fuels, I'll keep on buying those carbon credits because they're cheaper. And in my understanding, that's what's going to happen with our carbon markets in Brazil. We'll be able to show something like a Frankenstein that doesn't work in the direction of getting rid of the fossil fuels.
Lula is the second time that he is a president in Brazil. And you said that the carbon market was introduced in Brazil in 2009. RED Plus, for instance, was one of the mechanism which was actually portrayed as something not relevant for the communities, the indigenous, I remember. How can you understand today that there is also the fact that Brazil is not alone, is with the two basin, and they have these policies together to implement this carbon market, but in a fair manner, they said, related to the voluntary carbon market. They said that they want to have, the Minister of Environment yesterday of Congo, DRC, said that they want to have a sovereignty carbon market and not a voluntary carbon market. What do you think of this?
I think there's lots of misunderstanding of what really goes on in these carbon markets around the world. So if you have a compliance market like the European one, or the one that I would like to see here in Brazil, it's national. It's something that regards your industry, the state of art of the process that produce things here in Brazil. When we talk about carbon credits and project-oriented projects that reduce emissions, then you'll have to look at who are the certifiers of these carbon credits. So you have some organizations, international, nonprofit, that are the people that are issuing these credits. I hope someday we'll see one of the markets selling carbon credits coming from the Article 6.4 of the Paris Accord. So these organizations that they develop methodologies, rules, kinds of projects that can be accepted, and so on. And if you do a project that does reduce emissions, then you get your carbon credits. Well, if you're a company, you can sell these carbon credits wherever you want for the price that you want. That's the price that you can get, of course. So it's a volatile market, and there's no government that has any ruling on top of that. So when I hear expressions like we want to have an internal carbon market, I kind of say it's going to be complicated because you will have to make somebody buy those carbon credits. A carbon market has the two sides. You have the supply and you have to have the demand. There's two sides. You have to have the line of supply, so all these projects are generating carbon credits, but you have to have a demand. And what most people, at least here in Brazil and some voices outside of Brazil as well, they speak a lot about carbon markets, looking only at the people that are selling those carbon credits. They don't see who is buying them. And then here in Brazil, for example, I hear that Brazil is going to sell billions of dollars in carbon credits. And then I start asking myself, who in the world is going to pay Brazil billions of dollars in carbon credits? Europe is not, China is not, India is not, the United States is not. So I don't see a market this size happening anytime, but we'll have to see how these things develop. One further question that you talked about indigenous people. What we saw in these last 10, 15 years were a lot of these, what we call red projects, reduce emissions from forest degradation and deforestation.
Yeah.
And these projects were made mostly without hearing people that live on that ground. It's the indigenous communities, it's the people, local communities, it's some organizations that live in this place. They were completely ignored. So their voices are strong right now, and what they are asking for is we want a part of that. In terms of carbon projects, I think that is urgently necessary. But I am wary about the red projects, these projects that conserve the forest, because as the methodologies that we have right now in this carbon space, the volume of carbon credits you get to preserving the forest is proportional to the risk of deforestation in that area. That means if you're in a very remote part of the Congo, very remote part of the Amazon, where the risk of deforestation is very small, you're going to get a small quantity of carbon credits. If your area is right next to where all the mass is being made, you're going to get a lot of carbon credits for the same size of area, for the same hectare. So what is perverse in this system is that if you want to make money with red projects, you have to pray that your neighbors will cut down their trees as fast as possible. You want to have a very high rate of deforestation around you, because then you can make a lot of money. And in my understanding, this is exactly what we don't want to see happening. So a red project, in my understanding, is perverse. It gives the wrong signal to the wrong people.
But how can you understand that Red Plus is working in some part of the world related to the companies? There are American, U.S. companies, well, which are working in Kenya, for instance, and they said that it's working, it's helped the people.
Yeah, I know. And then you have now these companies from the Gulf also making strange deals with governments in Africa, like Liberia and things like that, saying we're going to take care of your forest for you, and we'll pay you a lot of money for that, but then we're going to make carbon credits for ourselves. I don't know. I don't like it. I don't like it, but I see what's going on, and it's basically the oil industry is probably the only industry in the world that does have those billions of dollars, and they would like to have them so they can sell you a whole cargo of liquefied natural gas or a whole cargo of oil with all the carbon credits on top of it for you to burn whatever you want and not feel guilty about it. So it's the only sector in the world that would have the appetite and the means to buy billions of dollars of carbon credits per year. And what they're showing this last 6 months, 7 months, is that they're really going after that kind of thing. And I think that's awful, because if we continue to burn fossil fuels, we will not see the temperature be controlled.
There are civil society which say that carbon market is a false solution. You just linked with the oil industry. In the statement today, Lula said that many countries will not have the ability to provide more ambition NDCs, national determined contributions.
Mm-hmm.
He said this. How do you understand his statements related to the national interest of your country and related to what you said related to the relation to the oil companies and the carbon market?
So I think this is one thing that Lula is showing, at least in Dubai, is only the green side, is only Marina Silva side. So what he started to push a few months back, and he's bringing that very strongly to Dubai now, is how to create a forest fund for tropical forest countries. And this fund should be should have money from all the developed countries, the rich countries, of course, and that money will be used to preserve the forest all around the world. I don't think Lula was thinking about money from oil at that point.
Okay, what do you think of what he said of zero deforestation in Amazon? He said that there will be zero deforestation in 2030.
My personal opinion, it's going to be very low. If they keep up the job that they did this year, and I believe they will, the deforestation rate in Brazil is going to be low. I don't know, zero. Perhaps it's a bit exaggerated, but it's going to be really low. They're doing a fantastic job right now in the Amazon, and they're starting to address another area that's being kind of harassed by the agribusiness. I think he has all the means. There's a study that we made a few years ago that the impact of stopping deforestation in Brazil in our GDP is zero. So he can do that. He only has to face a political fight with some groups, but there will be no loss in the economy. There will be no loss in lots of other sectors. You can just stop cutting down the forest almost without pain. So I do believe it's a strong will. He will be able to cut down the forest rate to a record low without changing one thing about oil and gas. I believe, because I understand Lula's history. Before he created the Workers' Party. He was employed in the automobile industry. He believes in development like there used to be said in the late 60s and 50s, that development at all costs, you have to have a strong industry, you have to burn oil. So he has that kind of vision still, but he's a very versatile politician. So he understood that this climate issue is something that he can use very well, and he's using it very well.
So you said
but inside his mind, I do think that he will still accept that we need to pump out lots of oil and sell lots of oil to the world.
Okay, so you said that Lula's background is from the oil company. He's part of the oil entrepreneurs.
No, he was an employee in Volkswagen, I think, or Mercedes-Benz, and one of those things, but way back down in time. No, I don't think he has any direct relations with the oil industry. Okay. And the oil industry in Brazil is basically one company. It's a semi-state company called Petrobras, and Petrobras has a very strong national appeal. There were lots of campaigns to defend it back in the 50s and the 60s. It still has an image of the right Brazilian company that's going to be one of the biggest in the world. And there's lots of people that still are betting on that.
I see.
But I don't think Lula, again, is a very, very shrewd politician. He knows what he can say. He knows what he can't say. So he'll try to navigate this contradiction for a few more days or months.
Tell me, if you have to compare Lula, the first government of Lula, and this government, how can you compare it? What are the strengths and what are the inconveniences?
Climate change was not exactly a big issue in 2002 when he started his first term. It was already on the table. Lots of people were talking about it, but it wasn't a burning issue as it is now. Now you just can't avoid having to address the issue somehow. Back in 2002, you could basically ignore it. In 2002 as well, the syndicates, the unions here in Brazil were very strong. And our neoliberal governments in the last 20 years basically destroyed them. So he lost a bit of the contact with the population themselves. The fact that Bolsonaro was elected in 2018 meant that the right has a very, very strong penetration in lots of sectors that we thought it was impossible for them to get, but they're there. So the whole political base of Lula changed drastically from 20 years ago.
I see.
And the economic situation is also quite different. The economy was in a better shape, and Lula had the chance, the luck to ride on the commodity bubble that China created in the early 2000s. And he rode that bubble very, very well. So Brazil became richer than it was when he took power. Right now, the economic situation in the world is different. We have wars. We have a very high price of oil. So it's a much more complicated scenario. And Brazil is not in that good shape anymore.
And how do you see Brazil within the BRICS, for instance, related to the action and economic also situation?
We were talking yesterday about Lula invited Saudi Arabia to become one of the BRICS, and now Saudi Arabia invited Brazil to become one of the OPECs. So there might have been some kind of bargain there. I don't know. I don't think that the BRICS will ever be able to wield geopolitical power. They might be a nuisance. They might raise issues. They might cry a lot, but I don't see them as having any big influence in geopolitics around the world. I think in terms of the big fight between the US and China, the BRICS won't mean anything.
And lastly, Shigueo, what are your solutions? You've been in this field as an activist for 20 years. You've been in all this part of your country. What are your solutions for the youth to remember what you said, what you've done, but also about the green and blue jobs?
It's basically the same for the last century, I think. We have to go back to school. Everybody has to go back to school. We have to teach our children better than we are right now. I don't see any other way of improving quality of life, except if you have citizens that know what is good for themselves, and not because a pastor said so, not because a politician says so. Everybody has to be able to think and understand what's happening in the world. And that's basically education. And I've seen education here in Brazil get worse in the last 20, 30 years. It's a pity. And although I'm in the climate movement because that's where my heart and my brains are, but I think the only way that we have to have a better quality of life for all is through better education. And then educated people can start electing governments that really represent them, and that may change a bit the face of the world.
But in terms of green and of green jobs, how do you see it? How do you integrate the youth? You said go to school, but there are actually opportunities in your country related to renewable energy. Also.
Right now, lots of opportunities. We have a huge potential to developing more solar panels and farms, and every megawatt of solar power requires qualified labor, in huge amounts compared to a mine, a coal mine, or an oil field. So that's one thing. The other thing is that if you have more electricity, and that's one hope, you create lots of other opportunities. There's one small backlash. If we go for the electric vehicles, the old way of producing automobiles employs more people per kilometer passenger than an electric vehicle. But I think that compensates with lots of other things. So yes, in this moment, I do expect that renewable energy will continue to drive its growth strongly, and that will, of course, create lots of job opportunities for everyone.
I see.
And good jobs, not low wage, unstable jobs.
And can you just say it in Portuguese? What is in one sentence the message that you want to send to the people at COP28 and also the youth in your country in Portuguese?
Por favor, vamos olhar para as nossas crianças, vamos olhar para a educação delas.
Which means?
Let's look at our children. Let's look at their education.
Thank you, Shigueo. Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome.